Thank you for listening to the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast with hosts Clara and Jimmy Hinton. If you're new to the podcast, please look us up on your favorite podcast app, subscribe, like, and share so that you never miss an episode. If you'd like to further support us, visit patreon.com/speakingout and check out the different rewards. You'll find exclusive rewards if you sign up as a patron of the podcast. Thank you for your support, and let's get into the show. Welcome to this week's podcast. As always, we thank our patrons who make the podcast possible. And today we have with us Eric Skwarczynski of the Preacher's Boy podcast. Eric, thanks so much for being with us, man.
Yeah, glad to be here.
Yeah, so Eric can be best described as a storyteller. For nearly a decade, he's worked in various creative roles, primarily as a videographer. His work's taken him to over 20 states, 13 different countries, and he has included a documentary film, which is an 8-episode miniseries. He's done several commercials. Eric's deeply passionate about raising awareness of mental, physical, and sexual abuse within independent Baptist churches. Your podcast, the Preacher Boy podcast, launched in January of 2020 and has already passed 700,000 downloads, which for people in the audience, outside of the podcast world, that's a tremendous amount of downloads. It's pretty hard to rank that high that quickly. Very few podcasters do it. So I commend you. You have an awesome podcast and you're clearly resonating with a lot of people.
Yeah. It's bittersweet. It resonates with a lot of people. But it's been really cool.
Yeah. Well, I was honored to be a guest on your podcast. So we're reversing that now, having you on our podcast. We've been wanting to have you for a while. And it's just sometimes it's hard to make schedules jive. But I guess, today we're going to talk about Josh Duggar because that's huge in the news. Just tons of people obviously followed the family, very famous family.
Right.
But I'm going to back up a little bit and just talk about, it wasn't really prepared, but just off the cuff, like what are some of the things that you've gleaned from doing your podcast for almost a year now?
Man, I was kind of mentioning beforehand, like I realized when you grow up within this world, and I grew up from the time I was in the womb in the independent Baptist world. And so there's a lot of teaching that, I didn't realize was harmful until years later. I'm still realizing. I'll be talking with somebody over lunch, or I'll be talking to somebody on the podcast. And I'll be like, that is weird that we were taught that, or it is weird that, my youth pastor would say this about mental health, being this, or that we would hear this teaching about, women in the church. And so I think that the number one thing is just how bizarre some of it really was. And it feels kind of odd, like admitting that. The other thing I've really learned has just been how slow things change. And I'm sure you feel this way, with your podcast, with your book, and with the incredible advocacy work that you're doing. We can talk about this for years. We could talk about this. I've been talking about a situation for now 9 years, the situation that kind of sparked all this. And he's still on a platform every Sunday, the first person I ever started talking about. And so for me, the frustrating realization is that this is a long-term work, and it's going to take a long time for it to change. And it's steering this massive ship in a different direction. And it's not an overnight thing. You'd like to think, oh, the podcast did really well, and we got a lot of downloads, that the church is transformed, and it's not like that. It's one at a time, one person at a time, and one small change at a time, and hoping that in the macro, something is going to be affected in a major way.
Yeah, that's interesting you say that, because, I saw Rachel Denhollander's post on Twitter from yesterday, because, they just settled that massive settlement, like $320 million or something like that, to the victims of Larry Nassar. And they settled that with USA Gymnastics. But Rachel put a post, kind of saying the same thing. Like, people don't realize the amount of work that we've been doing behind the scenes for so many years, people working, volunteering tirelessly. And so she said, justice is one small part of what we still need to do. And there's still a lot of work that needs to be done to fix these organizations that are so broken.
Right. Well, and that's counting once the advocacy even starts. Like, that's not even counting the years that people were holding this in, not being able to talk about it, where it wasn't public, and that to me is the scary thing, is like, yes, there's people that have been fighting for justice that are, just going through the warped legal system for years, trying to figure this out, going through the loopholes in their churches to figure this out. But then you have the people who, one, have never had the opportunity to speak out, or at least feel like they don't have the opportunity to speak out, or have been holding it for 10, 20, 30 years before going through that process. There's a lot of time that people are having to sit with this under the weight of what happened to them, of this abuse.
Yeah. Well, and you have that perpetual letdown, disappointment, seeing all the money and power that's behind legislatures. And Sean Doherty, who we're friends with, and he's been working tirelessly with Congress here in Pennsylvania to try to get laws passed that make sense, to provide justice for victims. That he just posted yesterday, and he said, well, I went to Harrisburg, and he said, once again, I left there realizing that these politicians are owned by lobbyists. He's like, they own them.
Yeah.
And just throw big amounts of money. And I think people don't realize how corrupt our legal system is, where politicians are so slow to pass laws because there's so much crap that has to unravel behind the scenes. And it's like, if their goal is to wear down survivors and to get them to stop lobbying and advocating for new laws, like, it's working.
Yeah. Well, in so many of these cases, you mentioned the Olympics. I mean, the pressure around keeping that institution feeling pure, is there. And then you have, I mean, we're talking about churches, who wants to be known as the person who, looks like, at least in their mind, is taking a stand against churches. That's not a comfortable spot to be. Even a secular politician feels pressure and fear, especially in the Bible Belt, where these cases seem to have the worst luck. But even places like California, there's a lot of hesitation to, take that stand, to stand with the victim, as opposed to this institution that we don't want to think of as corrupt.
Yeah. I mean, I've consulted with several churches that have, I commend people like crazy for doing the right thing. And Dom and Megan Benning are one of the churches that I consulted with that, like, I just predicted, I was like, this church is going to blow itself up, because I could tell the reaction of some of the leaders when I consulted with them. And sure enough, they end up being the feature story of, I think it was USA Today that ran the story on their church. And of course, their database started from that. But, that's one of the encouraging things that I see, is that though there's this extreme resistance in the church, there are people who are getting so pissed off that they're just, that they're like, you know what, like, fine, I'll start a database.
Yeah. Right.
I'm like, that's actually, it's such a productive way to, and it's not, retaliate's not the right word, because it's certainly not retaliation at all. It's doing what the church won't do. And people are being moved, and you're right. Like, we interviewed Dom and Megan, and they're so incredible.
Yeah,
and they're just common, ordinary people. And they're like, you know what, we've had enough. Like, people need to be warned about these people.
Yeah. That's a really cool thing, is like, they're ordinary people. And, I'm an ordinary, I don't have any, I mean, I look at people like yourself, or I look at people like a Rachel Denhollander, and it's easy for me to go like, what am I doing? Because this seems covered. Like, there's people who are, they are pastors, or there's people who are, they're lawyers, or they're this, but on the flip side of that, like, I think what's important right now is just volume, like how many people
Right.
can
Yeah.
join in. And so,
Yeah.
you don't have to have, thank God you don't have to have some kind of, special, special degree or something in it, because I
Yeah.
don't, I left I just lived in it. I saw it,
Yeah.
and now I'm talking about it, and it's seeing other people feel mobilized and feel like they can talk about it. That's really exciting.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I do want to get into the Josh Duggar thing because this
No.
is very fresh. It just happened on December 9. So on December 9th, he was found guilty on 2 charges of viewing and downloading child abuse materials. Um, as we know in advocacy, people in religious circles are really quick to default to either deny the abuse altogether or to offer this really quick, cheap grace for rapists. I mean, it happens way too often in the church. Mike Huckabee, for example, he wrote a Facebook post. I'm going to read it here. He wrote a Facebook post in 2015 defending Josh after allegations came out about, of course, he was visiting Ashley Madison, the affair website. He was having all these affairs, alleged affairs anyway, on his wife at the time. It also came out that he was molesting groups of young girls, including several of his own sisters. Here's what Huckabee wrote. Mike Huckabee. He said, Josh's actions when he was an underage teen are, as he described them himself, inexcusable. But that doesn't mean unforgivable. Here we go. It's like the natural default to rush to forgiveness, right?
Mm-hmm.
He and his family dealt with it and were honest and open about it with the victims and the authorities. No purpose whatsoever is served by those who are now trying to discredit Josh or his family by sensationalizing the story. So, I mean, if that wasn't repulsive enough, Mike Huckabee went on, and he was just like, he was so irritated that anybody would speak up about Josh Duggar and, this good family, you're ruining their good name, all the typical responses you hear in the church. So, people still today are defending Josh, because, and this is what I'm hearing, at least reading comments online. There was conflicting expert testimony about whether Josh was actually the one who accessed images on his computer. The images and videos were on his computer. They had been downloaded to his computer, but there were discrepancies in the expert testimony on whether it was actually Josh sitting at the computer who did this. What do you know about these details of the trial, and what do you say to critics like Huckabee who claim that no purpose whatsoever is served by people like us who dig up Josh's past?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to that question, because I think, with Josh Duggar, this unfolded in kind of 3 chapters. We had the molestation chapter, we had the Ashley Madison chapter, and then we had the the child sexual abuse material, and it's it's sad, because now you look at the Ashley Madison, you say at least that was not with children, and it's sad when you're going like, okay, well, there's these tiers to this, and even even when it comes to the molestation story, a lot more has come out about that through this case, which I'm sure we can chat about a little bit. But when it comes to the first part of the question, when it comes to the expert testimony, there was conflicting stories in the beginning, from the experts, which is not uncommon. It's not uncommon for experts to disagree. But the one expert who was really pushing that it wasn't, got grilled pretty hard during court, because they didn't have any experience with these split, and excuse if I don't know all my computer lingo, but these split partition devices. They didn't have any experience with that. And so their testimony was called into question quite a bit, their expert testimony, because they weren't familiar with the operating systems that were being talked about. To me, what's really damning, and they showed this in the court documents and throughout the trial, is from the same device, Josh was sending messages within the same time frame that things were being downloaded. And so for me, not being a computer expert and just looking at it, it seems pretty clear that that's what was happening. But also, my thing is always, when there's smoke, there's fire. And you
Mm-hmm.
can't base your decisions based on, oh, well, there was one thing, so there must have been 100 other things. But generally speaking, when I see one thing come out, there's usually a lot more under the surface. And there's already been two things now that have come out. One of them, the molestation with the sisters and with the family member, it's gone a lot, it's gone a lot deeper than what we were told originally. It was already covered up and minimized in the beginning. So for me, that's enough. But it's not a stretch for me to believe that these new allegations are true. It seems very obvious to me, that this would just be another piece of this. It's not far-fetched whatsoever. And so when it comes to people like Mike Huckabee, or, I posted a clip on YouTube back when this first broke, Todd Friel from Wretched Radio, did this whole thing about, this was before, he was a Christian. And so we can't talk about it, all this stuff. I was about to go into a Todd Friel impersonation, but I'll save that because I can't do that without a cold, and I definitely can't do it with a cold. But there's always these people, right, that come out and say, well, you can't judge this because it was before this point, or you can't judge this because this was part of this, or I'm seeing even the more unrelenting side that say we're against abuse will say, oh, well, some of this happened before he was a kid, or was there something that took place that made him feel this way, or he was so fill in the blank down a long list of things. My thing is, when it comes to these conversations, at a certain point, you are responsible for your actions, and you cannot blame. I have this conversation a lot with, with people when it comes to, oh, well, the movement this, or Christianity this, or fundamentalism teaches people to do this. I grew up in fundamentalism from the time I was a little kid. I've never molested somebody. I've never downloaded child pornography, or, I've never. And so, you cannot just blame the environment. You have to take responsibility for your own action. And also, when it comes to the conversation of this is, it's not Unforgiven, or it's not this, there's still, a fundamental piece of how the gospel, at least how I understand it, is there's repentance. And so, is your slate washed clean according to Christian theology? Is your slate washed clean in front of God? Sure. Is your legal obligation, gone? Do you not have any kind of legal recourse that follows, or natural ramifications for your sin or your abuse? No, that doesn't go away. And so it seems odd to me that, Christians are the quickest to deny the process laid out in scripture, not even just our own legal system, just in scripture. They're the quickest to deny that. And it makes me feel very strange that secular culture does a quicker job of following the right path to addressing these situations. Hollywood did a better job with their Me Too movement than the church has done with the Church Too movement.
Yes.
No contest.
Yeah. Well, I find it interesting too, like you find those themes that run so rampant throughout Christian bad theology. Mike Huckabee is like, either you or I or mom could have scripted everything that Huckabee said then.
Oh yeah.
And we could have scripted his response now, which is absolute utter silence. Like he didn't remove that post. He didn't apologize for that post. He didn't say, boy, to you people who are sounding, alarms that Josh Duggar is a dangerous person, or potentially could be a dangerous person, like you could have spared other children, and I didn't see that then, and I see it now, and I apologize. No. Like, we're never going to get that from Huckabee,
right?
And so I think it's just the church is so slow to learn, and it's so quick to offer this cheap grace and this cheap forgiveness. And I really want to interview, I forget his name right now, but the rabbi from the synagogue here in Pittsburgh, the Tree of Life Synagogue. I dug up every one of his interviews. It's the largest shooting in a Jewish synagogue in American history. And it happened, an hour from our house.
Right.
Not one time in anything written or in any interviews that he's done did he talk about forgiveness. He doesn't use the F word. And that's not surprising when you understand the Jewish scriptures and you understand that this idea of forgiveness is this new age idea that links it to all these emotions, and you can only heal if you offer forgiveness. Your abuser, the person who wronged you, will never even know that you're doing it, and that doesn't matter, you do it anyway. Like, that is it's not a biblical idea at all. And so it's interesting, anyway, that's kind of off topic, but it isn't, because Huckabee bought this bad theology, hook, line, and sinker, that says, well, that was in the past. And even when people are convicted for raping children, they get out of prison. And the idea in the church is, well, they did their time, and Jesus saves, Jesus forgives, nothing to see here.
Yeah.
Let's leave this guy alone. We'll leave it up to the leadership. And they enter into those stupid secret covenants, which I loathe.
If they have one.
If they have one.
Yeah.
And they go out of their way to keep that public record private, so that the rest of the congregation doesn't stand a fighting chance to protect their kids. And it goes back to what Huckabee said. Nothing can be gained here by talking about what happened in the past. And it's poisonous.
Yeah. It's and what's terrifying is, the bad example you gave just now, the bad version of this is they get the covenant agreement, they keep it quiet. That's if you're lucky. If you're lucky, you get that bad version. What generally happens, and the story that literally launched my show, he pled guilty, and people still defended him, saying that it was part of a plea deal, which is, done through bargaining. And so, you can't take that confession for what it is. He's still innocent. Here, let's raise money for his legal fees. So it can get pretty bad. And what's sad is, like, you talk about like the stupid covenant, which I agree. I think I think the way that churches handle that stuff is ludicrous.
Yeah.
But it's a sad time we live in, where, in a lot of senses, we'd settle for that, at least. Like, at least they have that. At least they admit it was wrong. At least we get the bare minimum done. That's a really rough place to be, is like, where, at least they admit he did something wrong. That's a good start. Like, that's the kind of progress that we're talking about, that's this very incremental change. And it's frustrating, and this
analogy just popped into my mind, Eric. I used to drive truck. And to me, that's like the driver is always responsible, not the mechanics. The driver is responsible for every mechanical in and out of that truck from front to back. You have to pre-trip inspect the truck every time you take off. The driver is solely responsible, legal and otherwise, for the safety of that truck. And to me, that's like saying, well, the driver walked around the truck and this one wheel at least had one lug nut instead of the 10 that it's supposed to have.
Right.
In the end, the wheel eventually is going to snap that remaining lug, and it's going to fall off and kill somebody. Right. But at least he had one. At least the driver had the sense to drive.
You have a wheel.
One, he still had a wheel on at the time.
Right. Yeah.
It makes no sense, because when there's imminent danger, like, we all know it in advocacy, and that's what floors me. Like,
we watch it. We see we see that one lug nut, and we see that one piece that's about to snap, and it's, that gives me the most anxiety out of anything with the show in my life. For the last, I mentioned the church I grew up in, they have a predator that's been on the stage, and they'll say all the stupid things you said. We know he knows he's not supposed to be around the kids, which he emceed one of their high school football games. That's not 100% accurate. He, he's singing there every Sunday. They'll say, oh, he doesn't have a title, but he's still on the platform, which anybody who doesn't go to church, goes into a church, looks at the platform, that's probably who's in charge. They'll say all those dumb things, but I have seen him get more and more comfortable, get more and more access over the last, almost a decade now. and I'm waiting for the wheel to fall off.
Yeah.
And it frustrates me. It makes me angry, but it also terrifies me that over the last decade, I don't know half the people at the church anymore. There's new people there who don't know, who have kids, who have teenagers, who are sitting there going, oh, who's that guy on the platform? Oh,
he's so nice.
He's so nice. He invited us out to lunch, or whatever the situation is. That people have taken advantage of very small windows. So when you let the door open, what's going to happen? And to me, that's a scary place to ponder.
Yeah, it really is.
As the two of you are talking, obviously I'm a lot older than both of you, have lived a lot of more years and been involved in the church a lot of more years. And it's strange, but interesting for me to see the shift that has taken place just in my lifetime. When I was a child, the sermons and the teaching were hellfire and brimstone. You sat there and you shook as a kid. I can remember shaking as a kid because sermon after sermon was taught about, if you don't do this and you don't live this way, you're going to hell. And hell was taught, and gnashing of teeth and fire, and I can remember having nightmares about going to hell. There was a shift then that took place, and it's a cultural shift as well as a church shift. Whereas if you spank your child, tap your child, you are what? You can be sued by
you're
your
an abuser,
child.
you're going to
You're
jail.
An abuser.
Or,
So the way we discipline in our homes, the way we discipline in our churches, the way we discipline in society it took a really big shift. To the point of where you have children suing parents and, all this confusion going on. And now we're kind of in this crazy mixed up conglomerate of a mess in church, in society, in our homes, where it's like anything goes. And it really is. And to unfix what got broken, or to fix what got broken, is going to take a lifetime of years. Because I watched this shift and it all exploded. It started in the 70s and continued, and now look at the mess we have. It's easier to say, sweetheart, okay, you downloaded kiddie porn, let's talk about this. Let's talk about what might have went wrong. How was I a bad parent? Why did mommy or daddy make you do that? Is that making sense?
But I think it's a little more complex than that, though, because it's the pendulum has swung
swung too far
from hellfire and brimstone to love, compassion,
no matter what,
oozing compassion on everybody except for people who were unjustly victimized. And I think that's where the confusion is for these survivors, because they're like, wait a second, where is Mike Huckabee? Where's Mike Huckabee and other people? Where are they gushing over us?
That's
that's
right. And that's where I want to say is there's I resonate with your background, even though I'm not much older, I grew up under the same thing. I grew up, fundamental Baptist world it hasn't changed since the 60s with Jack Hyles. It's 50s. And that's the funniest thing ever when you're pulling up clips is like, what year is this from? Is this 1995 or is this 1952?
Right.
Because everyone dresses the same. It's what's going on. But I grew up under that hellfire brimstone, very, people ranting about, boys wear blue and girls wear pink and, don't go to the movie house. No one calls it that anymore, all that good stuff. And so there was that, but so I experienced that, but then I also like the unconditional love and affection and forgiveness, which the word I don't even want to say, the way it was taught was showered out on people who were team players. So as long as you were falling in line with the church, you got that. The minute you stepped outside. So this is when, for me, when I was part of it and I was in it and I was, working and doing all these ministries and running and following everything to the T, I got that love, that unconditional love bombing. The minute that I said, hey, there's a predator, what do we do? Then it was, you're bitter, you need to be better. You need to forgive. You need to. It didn't happen with a little kid. It was a teenager. All those things started.
It was in the past. Yep.
Right. Stuff. And now I get the. I'm back to getting the hellfire and brimstone and fill in the blank. And it's amazing. It's very much like I look at my relationship with the church, and it's been very much an abusive. It's been, we'll love you as long as you're not saying anything negative, or as long as you're following my commands. We love you. But if you step outside that by an inch, we're gonna come after you.
And again, in the words of Mike Huckabee, what purpose does it serve?
Right,
Eric. Talking about all these people that you're digging in the trash can and you're pulling up all this stuff that they did in the past, and why don't we air your dirty laundry? And it's like there's this disconnect. And Les Ferguson talked about that when we interviewed him. There's this job of talking about that. There's this disconnect because normal people can't fathom molesting a child. We can't even imagine what that would be like, because our minds aren't wired that. We can't think of that level of depravity and sick growth.
But you see pastors tweeting, but by the grace of God, that could have been me.
I mean, let's talk about that. And his answer was, but no, it couldn't.
Right.
Yeah. And when I see that, I go, like, because I see people do that. I see people say that. I see people write that stuff. And again, it's seeing the wheel about to fall. Like, in my mind, they go to a mental list. It's something's not right there.
Yeah.
Because I don't see these stories and think, man, that could have been me. Like, because it's not right. It's not, you don't gradually fall into this.
Right.
Is it gradual with how much you try or how much you, how much you push the boundaries, sure. But is there this, like I mentioned, the Ashley Madison thing, or someone having an affair in the church, which is not ridiculously uncommon either. But someone having an affair in the church, in my mind, is not this path down to, okay, are they going to abuse a child? Like, those are not the same. Right. And we have to stop equivocating, like, oh, they had an affair to, oh, they molested a child. That's not even a bridge. Like, there's, sure, they may do one of those things if they're in the child molestation category, but it's like, to me, it's just amazing that we've thought, like, oh, it starts small. You're going to start with porn. You're going to have an affair, and you're going to molest a child. It's like, if you think that's the path, then I have questions for you. I have questions for your how you think about this stuff, because it sounds like you're putting these things in the same category, which they're clearly not.
Yeah. I'm with you 100%. Yes. So you came out of the IFB denomination, so you're familiar, like you said earlier, with the teachings of Bill Gothard. Gothard is the founder of the Institute in Basic Life Principles, the IBLF. It claims to be a non-denominational organization. Former members clearly call it a cult. People who have gotten out, they say this is a cult. The Duggars are followers of the IBLF or IBLP. And despite sexual allegations against Gothard himself, the Duggars still continue to speak at his annual conference. So in a nutshell, can you tell us what the IBLF teaches about family and sexuality? Like, is it like, I don't know a lot about it. I really don't.
So, I mean, the fundamental, the word fundamental even has such a different mening when I'm talking
all about these F words, right?
But, right. Well, an IBLP sounds like a bowel disease, but wait, what do you have? I have IBLP. Oh my God. But I just, but it's the basic teaching. And this is where I think everybody, you mentioned, like, some of it even filtered into your world a little bit. Like, you saw some of this come in. The most basic thing that he's known for is the umbrella theology, which is that you've got God, you've got, the Father, and then you've got this other umbrella, which is like the mother. And then you've got this other umbrella underneath it, which is the kids. And that's kind of the authority structure within the movement. So that gets taught a lot. within many different circles, but that kind of originates with him, this umbrella theology. But the piece that I think is most relevant when discussing the Duggars, and this is something that I was talking about when this first happened in conversation with people, is the way that, and this, I would say this is IBLP, but this is also the independent Baptist world. So even those that would say like, we weren't part of that, we weren't part of Gothard specifically. Yeah, I could say that too, but we got these teachings, is the way that women and even children, I would say female children specifically, are taught about, sexuality is very, very twisted. And so, from the time that you're a little kid, and I say you, meaning I would say women in the church. And I know because I sat in classrooms where I saw girls taught about, make sure your skirt is below your knee because you don't want to cause impure thoughts. And, so from the time you're a little kid, you're taught like you are a stumbling block. You're a reason people are tempted. You're the reason that, sexual abuse happens, basically. And that's from an early age. And so when the Duggar story happened, and I watched I believe it was on Fox, one of the news networks, when they did the special with the Duggar girls, and they were talking about it. And I saw the way that they talked about it. I saw the way that, and I feel really bad for, Jessa and for, the other girls in the family, who experienced it and who talked about it. And then I saw the dad, and I saw Jim Bob talk about it, and I saw the way he worded things. I saw the way he talked about it as if it was this mistake on Josh's part. It was this horrible mistake. I saw a lot of things come out. I saw it minimized Josh's actions. He was a teenage boy, it was this and this. Right. And then, what I saw happen within, Christian subcultures was, oh, the girls must feel awful. It must be hard speaking out against their brother, which I'm sure it was for a lot of reasons. But, there's always this, the impetus is always on the woman within these circles, and within the victim. It's never with the abuser. With the abuser, for whatever reason, there's always this just, we're just going to protect, we're going to cover, we're going to minimize. That's why you hear statements like, several years ago or many decades ago or before he was a Christian, or there's this minimization that happens. But I did want to read one specific thing from Bill Gothard, because this is one of his teachings where, look, when I talk about the umbrella of authority, some people say like, oh, I agree with that in some way. You're just not complementarian, or, whatever. So they'll pick it apart. But this is undeniably evil. Like this is from Bill Gothard's textbook for the Family Life Institute. And like Scientology, you can't just buy these. Like you have to go to the conference. You have to be part of their movement. But this is what they teach in their curriculum. And this is the kind of curriculum that the Duggars were taught. So I do want to take a look at that really quick. I'm going to read it pretty quickly. So the heading of this is, why did God let a 4-year-old boy be molested by a 15-year-old neighbor? That's the heading of the document. Like, and I mean, this is an actual page from it.
Yeah.
Number 1, to teach him his responsibility to cry out to God for help. So this is a 4-year-old boy. Number 2, to motivate him to dedicate his body to God. Number 3, to give him a, quote, moral vaccination against future temptations. God will severely judge the 15-year-old boy for the evil that he did. However, your son can turn what was meant for evil into good. The vaccinations we receive for various diseases contain a small amount of the actual disease. Our immune system builds up a reaction to it so that if our body is exposed to the disease, it's prepared to fight it off. A similar result can occur in the life of your son if this matter is handled in a scriptural way. Number 4 is to transform aroused desires to spiritual power. Number 5 is to motivate him to write God's law in his heart. This is a 4-year-old boy molested by a 15-year-old neighbor, which, if you look at the Duggars situation, how much of this, if you're reading this curriculum growing up, knowing this context, how is that changing how you view yourself as a survivor of this? Number 6, to concentrate on God's hatred of sodomy. Number 7, to confirm the importance of avoiding evil companions. So again, the guilt is with you. You were around the wrong person. To learn how to discern evil companions, to work out justice and mercy, because as a 4-year-old, I'm always able to discern all those things.
Right.
To help parents understand the basis of genius. In a study by the Smithsonian Institute, 40 men considered geniuses were studied in order to find common denominators. The 3 common denominators were: 1, parents protected them from contact with other children; 2, they were continually around caring adults who taught them what they knew; 3, they were taught how to creatively solve problems. Based on this, your son should not have been with the other boy, but rather with adults so he could learn from them. Number 11, to see the need for a daily schedule for the best use of time. And number 12, to remind the father to pray a daily hedge of protection. So that's from Bill Gothard's teaching. That's penned by Gothard. That's the kind of teaching that's being given to survivors and to someone who's a Josh Duggar is going, they can justify themselves for forever. I mean,
absolutely.
No.
Yeah. Like I hear that. And my first response is I want to take Gothard and
get back to your truck driving days.
Yeah. I'm being brought back to my truck driving days, language included.
But it's crazy. Like when you read, like I'm reading that and I'm going like, is that what it said? Like when you're reading it, you're looking at going like, this is a picture of like, this is not, because if I saw that separated and someone said like, oh, he believes that, I teach that, I'd be like, okay, but like to see it written from the mouths of Gothard, it's like, one, how does he have such a massive influence where it can be felt across denominations?
Yeah.
Right.
But, also how many, because this is not a small curriculum, there's many, many, many thousands of people that go through this. How many people have been abused and are now taking this and applying it to their situation going, why did I do that? Why was I not
in this surrounding myself with adults? Yeah. Why did I not surround myself as a 4-year-old? I should have known to surround myself with adults. Yeah.
I should have been praying for protection. I should have been doing it's repugnant. Like it's shocking that it is taught. And this is what the Duggars were homeschooled with, was this curriculum. And so, again, I know we're going to get into to Josh's wife and all of that, but that's when I look at, we don't know all the victims in the family. A couple have come forward, but, and I wouldn't be surprised if there were stories with all of them, based on this, but, I do feel deep sadness and sympathy for the girls who grew up within the Duggar household, because even if they weren't physically abused, I think this teaching is abusive. And I think it's going to have, it's not something, this is why I have more leeway for people in this world than I think others do, is like, this is hard to shake off. Like you're being taught this from, being a little kid, that's a lot to work through. That's a lot to shake. And we get focused on the quirky things like, oh, why are they wearing skirts down to their ankles, or why are they doing that? That's the least of the problems. Like that is surface level stuff. Like these issues go super deep.
Really I was going to say like what Gothard wrote, what you read for us, that's not misunderstanding. Like that's just pure evil. And that's right. Like he's not extrapolating.
This is like abusive, it's right there.
Yeah. It's not like he's some bumbling idiot that doesn't know what he's writing. Like he's an intelligent man and he knows exactly what he's doing, what he's writing. And I think that's why it came as no surprise that there were these sexual allegations against Gothard himself. Those came out from dating back to like 2014. Not a shocker, because he's a misogynist.
As we sit here, we get enraged hearing that. And in my mind, I'm thinking, how do people buy into this, though? There are people that buy into it and they live by these rules, and they're teaching them in their homes and whatnot. They're taking this curriculum. How does that happen that people buy into that? I would like to think that I wouldn't, but does it happen to vulnerable people?
I think it's when it's all I mean, when you grow up in churches and that's all that's all you hear, and you idolize somebody and he's the one teaching it, so it must be gospel fact. you know?
It is
But that,
so against what we know inside. I
Mhm.
feel like God gives us his spirit that lives within. We're born with it, I believe, a moral spirit, so to speak, where we know to murder is wrong, to steal is wrong, to lie is wrong. We know that. We don't have to be taught that.
Right.
I feel anyway. But to listen to this, and there are so many people that buy into it, and the damage that is done, then no wonder it takes years and years and years and years to undo what is
Yeah.
being done here. And you're right, it makes you want to weep, it makes you want to
Mhm.
bleed for these children, who are taught this
Well,
and taught to live by it. It's
yeah,
awful.
I mean, I don't have any better grasp on the why. You
Yeah,
know,
it
I
right.
thought I would get closer to like, here's the reason, or here's the three simple reasons that people fall for this. You know,
Yeah.
because I used to go on some level. I mean, I believed. You know, I never heard this extreme aversion, but there were things that I
Mhm.
believed that were atrocious. I mean, I remember being taught by my youth pastor saying that, he thought insane asylums were just full of people that were demon possessed, and it gets misdiagnosed. We put
Oh,
labels on it,
yeah.
we call demon possession schizophrenia, and I remember
Right.
hearing that stuff. And, so there were extreme things like that I believed, or, women, the way that I viewed women, and the way that women are supposed to carry themselves and dress.
Mhm.
And, they're not supposed to, they're not supposed to go do this. They're not supposed to work. They're supposed to be at home, and, fill in
Right.
the blank with all these
Right.
different things. There were extreme things that I truly believe. So I understand how people fall into that. What I don't understand, and the thing that I haven't gotten any clarity on, and I don't think I will, because I don't think this is the way normal brains process,
Right.
is that as a 16-year-old or 17-year-old, whatever, whichever of those times, it doesn't matter. It's not a big
Mhm.
shift in your
Right.
development.
Right.
When I discovered a very specific crime had been committed by someone who was now, who had moved to our church and was relocated, and cover up was in the middle of going underway. I identified as a 16-year-old who had been indoctrinated his whole life. I identified that was wrong. And what I cannot
Right.
understand is why my dad, who's, 50 plus,
Mhm.
who didn't grow up in that world, who was working at the church, didn't think it was a larger cause for concern than what it was. And I can't, and why there's people who find out and go, oh my God, that's crazy. Well, they don't have them around kids, right? Okay, no big deal. Like
Mhm.
I can't understand it, because, and I've asked people who stayed in longer than I did, or who did.
Mhm.
And I said, what do you think it is that makes somebody, because I don't think I'm like better than them, but I'm like, what do you think it is that makes some of us snap out of it quicker
Right.
than
Right.
other? Because some people, I mean, I talked to, I mean, I've talked to people that are much, much older. I mean, like very, very old people, like people
Careful,
who,
Eric. Careful
no,
with the age thing.
no, I
Ancient
Careful.
mean, I
grannies.
mean, no,
Yeah.
I mean, I mean,
I
I mean, people that are close. I mean,
you
they're
can say
they're
it. You
they're
can
near
say
the end.
Old as dirt.
They've been
it.
in the. Not, I'm not talking to you. I mean old people. I mean people in their 70s, 80s,
Oh gosh.
night. Like they're and they're talking about, they've grown up in it their whole life, and they're
Mhm.
starting to see that crack. They're starting to see, like, this was not correct. And
Right.
and I sit there and go, like, how did it take till now?
Right.
To till the time they literally cannot, they can barely care for themselves,
Mhm.
and now they're sitting there and thinking about their life, and going like, oh, I can't believe I believe that. And I'm just like, how does it get to that point where you go your whole life and bite it? And I cannot get a grasp on that
Yeah,
answer.
that's
Like,
what
I
I
can't.
okay. We're
But we're
together on that. I don't get
Yeah,
it.
I
I don't
and I
get
and
it.
I thought, doing the show, I thought, like, maybe I'd start to understand the
Mhm.
psychology of it. But Jimmy, I mean, you said on my show, like, it's one of those things where, when it comes to abuse, we like, at a certain point, you have to stop even caring, like, what's the why? Because we may never really understand it. Because, and honestly,
Right.
maybe I'd be concerned if I could understand it better,
Yeah.
but I mean, but look, all three of us are extremely young, and we've got a lot of time to figure this out.
Look at you trying to right your wrongs.
No,
Eric,
well,
you can't go back.
But I mean, specifically, I don't want to give their name or anything, but I mean, I sat down with somebody, they're like, they're 90 plus years old, and they're just for the first time seeing those cracks in the, and for me, I'm just like, now it's like, there's no time to even change. I mean, you've lived your life.
Right.
And you never realized how abusive this situation was, or you never realized how abusive your husband was, or how, to me, that's terrifying, that there's people going, but I think it is, going back to what Jimmy said, there's this, I think it's just being taught from the time you're, and also too, I think for, the generations that are 90 now, that did grow up in the heyday of a Jack Hyles and the IFB and those leaders, like, they not only had the church, but also culturally, it was in a much different place, where we look at these situations where, the idea of somebody, raping their spouse wasn't an idea people had. The idea of this being, of women being able to speak out wasn't there. And so there's a lot of different factors. I think, but like I said, I think at a baseline, there's something just mentally different in the way that some people perceive these things. And it concerns me, but it's really concerning because I see people that otherwise seem very rational, that just in the church context, I don't know. I could talk about this forever because I think about this with my dad all the time. I love my dad. My dad is, and my dad is an otherwise pretty rational human being, but he's still at a church where the pastor says it's okay, he's forgiven, and we're going to monitor and blah, blah, blah. And so it's okay. And so for my dad, the pastor said it's okay. So it's okay. And I can't, that's just not my personality. Like, I just can't.
You and me both.
Yeah.
Well, I think that leads to another interesting question about Josh's wife, Anna. She's been in probably not the news as much as comment section of news articles, but and of course on social media, but it begs the question, what responsibility do people have who are brought up in that kind of environment where this is what they're taught, this is all they know? She's a woman, so she was taught that women are under the authority of their husband, that her and her children aren't to question the husband no matter what. So she's had some pretty harsh criticism online for sticking by Josh's side. Josh has been in the news for multiple scandals now, which we've mentioned. Do you think that the criticism of Anna is justified? And if you do, why? And if not, why not?
Yeah, this was interesting because when you reached out, I wanted to lay out before I said yes, like, hey, I don't think that there's a reason to not, which I kind of, I know your stuff enough to know, and well, both of you, I know both of you are, definitely don't hold back when it comes to talking about this stuff, and for me, I have so many mixed feelings about this specific facet of it. I mentioned, I think there's a lot of victims within the Duggar family that, it's I feel a lot of sympathy for. I think that it's struggling to identify it as being even wrong is probably something that's gone through their minds. I think with Anna specifically, this to me is kind of, so again, this all happened in like chapters. So you had the chapter of, the story of what happened with his sisters had come out, and there's part of me that goes, clearly more was known by like Jim Bob and by family friends than what we originally were told. That's been proven. There's court testimony. It was said under oath, this is what happened. As to what Anna really knew or understood, or the version she was told. I don't know. Some people were really like, why would you stay if that's the case? I can understand. So again, I'm not saying I think she made the right decision, but I can understand with the teaching she got, where divorce is taught to be the worst, most heinous sin you could possibly commit above anything else. I understand with what she was probably getting from the family was, if you leave Josh right now for something he did at, 2 decades ago, if you leave, think about what that's going to do to your children. Think about, so to some extent, I understand, while saying also I don't think it was right for her to stay in that situation. I understand in that horrible context why she was probably believing that she needed to. She probably was distancing and saying, this was many years ago. She was doing what everybody in the church, would typically do in this situation. Again, I don't understand it, but I think that's where, like, if I'm going to give grace on this, that's where I would say, okay, when the Ashley Madison thing happened, that's a choice to go, okay, it's a choice. Anybody, if they find out their spouse is unfaithful, they have a choice to go, do I stay, or, do I and make it work, or do I go? Again, I think compounding, most people would have said, I'm out. Like, this is, I think this third segment, to me, the minute that this raid happened, and I'm saying, it's like, I'll say me as a parent, because I am a parent, so I can say me as a parent. The minute that this kind of raid happens and the FBI is raiding my, in this example, my husband's, dealership, his place of work, or for me in life, if I found out that my wife and they were raiding and they found all this stuff, am I going to believe instantly, oh, they did it? Maybe not. I'll probably be in denial like anybody would. I think if they had a track record like Josh's, I'd probably go like, okay, like there's too much here coming one after another. Mm-hmm. But as a parent, I'm getting my kids out of the situation till we know, and that to me is what disturbs me about Anna's response. And what disturbs me about Anna's responses through all of this, at least from what we can see. And also, granted, there's things we can't see. We're not in the conversations in the kitchen, we're not in those things. But from all the public responses, from her walking in a trial, smiling with Josh, holding his hand going in, like, that to me is inexcusable. That's where, if there's evidence, like physical evidence of, child pornography, child sexual abuse stuff on your computer, you want to get your kids away from this person until you find out if that's true or not, no matter what emotional tie you have to them. Yeah. And so for me, when the question comes up, is criticism of Anna valid? Yeah, I think criticism of anybody is valid. I think there were steps taken all along the way that put her kids in danger. I'm the scariest thing to me is, has anything happened with his own kids? Has anything happened? Like, to me, that question just rattles in my mind of, like, if someone's at this point and has a history of this with other, with other family members, like, the first thing that needs to be, happen when this comes out is Anna calls whoever she needs to call to go get the kids out of that situation. Definitely not him making bail and going and doing these whatever visits. And then also, like, you need to get a therapist with the kids to walk through, like, has anything happened, walking through those tough questions. And so for me, I think at this point, if Anna stays with him through this, or if Anna stays loyal through this, to me, that's an inexcusable decision. And, that's where I just can't, my grace runs out to this point of, like, okay, now you're actively endangering your kids. And I'll go back and say that grace for me ran out the minute these supervised visits were happening. Like, to me, if there was any inkling, like, and again, hypothetically, if there was any inkling of this with my spouse, who I love and who, I would not let my daughter anywhere in the vicinity until I know.
Yes.
And so that's, to me, that's where I think it is. And again, there's people that go like, well, she grew up in this movement or she did that. Many things can be true. I can feel deep sympathy that she was taught horrific things. I can feel deep sympathy. She grew up in a twisted movement with a big spotlight and fill in the blank. But many things can be true. She can also make a really bad decision for her family. And so, that's where I think people lose this, is they want to go one way or another and go like, well, that's no excuse. She didn't have any kind of horrific upbringing and she wasn't taught bad stuff. That's just her excuse. Well, no, she was. Or they're the other side and say, well, that's what she was taught. And so we can just totally like, go Anna, we support you 100%. Like, I support you that you were taught really bad stuff. I don't support you that you'd put your kids in a dangerous situation.
We
I agree.
obviously are running long on time, but that's something I'd like to discuss further at some point. And Eric, if you're willing, maybe in the future, having been in a position, not to the degree that she is, but in our small town, we were a public figure, so to speak. Your dad was well known with everyone for 3 states around. I mean, he was an adored preacher for years. We were the adored family. We were the family up on the pedestal, so to speak, the big family with 11 kids, all faithful to church and whatnot, all attending Christian colleges, graduates of Christian college, on and on. When it became known, by my youngest daughter telling me about her dad, I had already in my mind spent years, Eric, separating myself from him silently. There were things that the mental abuse, I knew nothing of the sexual abuse, but the mental abuse was horrid. It truly was what he did to me. It truly, truly was. But I also was brought up with the teaching that if you divorce your husband, you are like this, so kind of a whore type of person, that you will destroy your children by doing so. And so I suffered in silence. I told no one. In fact, I journaled through those years, but I tore my journals up and threw them out because I didn't want, if anything happened to me, I didn't want my children reading anything negative about their dad because they loved him so much. The pressure that is put on a wife and mother is unbelievable. I felt many times I was going to have a total mental breakdown. I almost did at certain points. I carry a guilt and a shame with me to say I am divorced. Many times if people ask me, are you married, or I've lied, and I say, yeah, I'll be honest with you. It's that hard yet for me to say, no, I am divorced. I get it where women are. I totally get it. It takes the guts of, I don't know how to explain, to stand alone. It truly, truly does. And you do stand alone for a long time. And I can tell you that children don't always understand. I'm going through a situation right now where one of my children is being very hateful to me. That, because of my actions and, how I've kind of let the family fall apart. And it has become, in her eyes, it was me who did it. It's tough. And so I sympathize deeply, and I'm glad you have that same, that sympathy. I knew right from wrong. I eventually, when I was confronted about John's sexual abuse, immediately there was no question.
When that's that separation that Eric's talking about. I mean, when push comes to shove, and it comes to the safety of your own children, you and I walked into that police station and there was never a question about it. Like there was never any other option that we entertained ever.
Let me say something though. Had I been with a tribe of 11 little children, I don't know, Jimmy, that I don't know. I would like to believe I would have done the same thing, but in my mind, I know what I would have been thinking. how am I going to do this alone? How,
Mm.
and where is the church? Because I
Yeah.
can tell you, there was not one church member who came to my side. Not
Wow.
one. Not one. I can say that in all honesty. There was not a one. And
Yeah.
that has crushed me till the end of my days,
Yeah.
truly.
Yeah.
And so I get it, but I get it. We'll leave it
Yeah.
at that.
Yeah.
It
No,
is
I
tough. It's just,
well, and I
even though
understand.
it's tough, that's all,
Yeah. Well, and
Yeah.
I just had a conversation. I mean, my mom just visited, and I'm being careful what all I say
Yeah,
about
me
this
too,
specific
and
situation, but
yeah.
Sure.
but I can say, you know, and my mom's very open about this stuff. So, but, my mom was extremely depressed in my last couple years of high school, and a lot of it was happening. I mean, so was I. I mean, a lot of it was tied in with, everybody, nobody was standing with me when I was talking about this.
Yeah,
I
it's
was,
horrible.
people were burning the bridges as fast as they could
Yeah.
burn. And, but yet I was still stuck for 2 more years in this place. And, one thing I will say is, I really resented for a period, I really resented my mom, and I really, what
Yeah.
you just said, I mean, it, it breaks my heart hearing that, you're going through that right now, is like, but I also understand too, you know, there was a long period, even before that, there would be periods, and I always had a good relationship with my mom, but there were periods where I would have these like, why is she depressed? There's nothing to be depressed about. Like,
Yep.
we go to this great church and we do this, and all this stuff.
Yeah.
And then it became like, when this situation happened with the predator at the school, and he got moved there, and I started bringing it up, I believed for many months and even a couple of years, I was just mad because she would be depressed and sad, and then I'd be like, well, you're not even saying anything about this, like, I'm the only one that's talking about this.
Mhm.
Only to find out later, she was also behind in the position she could in the church, bringing it up, writing letters,
Right.
talking to
Right.
people, and being silenced.
Mhm.
And now I realize, like, there were, we both feel like, when I talk to my mom now, we both feel this thing of, you know, of, we were missing what each other were doing. We
Yep.
were missing what was
Yeah.
going on, what each other were feeling.
Yeah.
And, and it is hard. It's hard. And I resonate, not to the same degree, but I just resonate with, like, family being at odds on these issues is extremely hard.
It is. It's tough.
It's,
And yeah, it's just
yeah.
tough.
And I respect, I mean, I respected you when Jimmy was first sharing the story. Like, I hearing the decision that you made, just knowing, again, you were in a position that, 10x what we were experiencing, 100x what we were
Mhm.
experiencing, but just seeing how it tore my mom apart, being a woman in the church, being married to someone who was basically second in command at the church,
Mhm.
who was making a decision contrary to what the right thing was.
Right.
I saw that rip her apart, and I can't imagine that being extrapolated to what you were experiencing. And
It
I
shreds.
respect you so much for
Thank you.
making the right choice.
Thank you.
That's I just want to say that. But
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to skip a question that I was going to ask you about the IFB, because I think that's a whole podcast
Segment,
in
yeah.
itself.
see the
And
Preacher
then
Boys
some.
podcast.
I know,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That's a
Yeah.
whole series of podcasts. But I guess I'll end by asking this question, because this is a burning question that rattles around in my head all
Sure.
the time. Do you see any hope for the church changing to become a safe place that values human life over protecting its own image? Do you, if so, if you see any hope, what do you think it's going to take to clean this up? I mean, not a loaded question or anything. Take your time.
What a cheery conversation to start the day.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
I just roll out of bed and into trauma. No, but and I'll try to keep this brief, but for this question goes back and forth in my mind hourly. I think about these topics all day, every day in some capacity. I mean, it just filters in and out. And I ask myself that question all the time. And there's times I'm more optimistic than others, but I would say at this point, my optimistic moments have decreased a lot. And when I do see hope for change, it's on a very micro level. I think, to take it personal, I mean, my faith has been hurt very deeply by, again, not by Hollywood or rock stars or all the people I was told were the threats. Like for me, I struggle to see people who claim to be transformed by the Holy Spirit living in a way and acting in a way and covering for things in a way that far exceeds what I see happening in places like Hollywood or places like, secular places that I was warned about. And so for me, it's affected my ability to believe in there being some radical transformative power to this, and I say that, I think critics love that because they like to go, I knew it. I knew you, they'll go, I knew you didn't believe it. And I'm like, well, it's news to me because I did. And, there's critics that go, I knew if you focused on the bad, that it would, and I swear I'm getting to your answer, but there's people that said, oh, because you focused on the bad, that's all you saw.
Yeah.
And to that, I'm 26, and so I don't have a long track record of like, I've been to 30 different ministries and I've raised my daughter, and I don't have that. But what I do have is every church that I've been a part of, every ministry that I've been a part of, which is 1, 2, 3, 4 now. Every single one has had a extreme abuse scandal or has mishandled a case like this, or there's been, or one of those was extreme financial fraud. But every way along the way, as a 26-year-old who just followed the path, in a lot of ways, like it followed me. Like these things kept happening around me and the ministries I was in across denominations, Southern Baptist Convention, Independent Baptist. Like I've seen it over and over again. And so
you're just demon possessed.
Well, that's it.
We finally figured it out, Eric.
But it keeps happening. And for me, it's like, I didn't ask for Jesse Rule from Chico, California to be transferred to our church as part of a cover-up. I didn't ask for that to happen. I didn't ask for the person who ran the missions organization I worked at to be embezzling, hundreds of thousands of dollars from the organization while I was making $500 a month. I didn't ask for those things to happen, time after time after time. And so, at a certain point, you're just going like, this is an epidemic. Like this is something that's happening, or pandemic. I never remember which is the right word, epidemic or pandemic, but it's one of the demics. It's happening.
Yeah.
It's happening all over the place. And I'm seeing now as an advocate, that was just me before I even started focusing on the bad. The bad seemed to be focused on me, on the church,
Sure.
on the organizations. Now on the advocacy side, what makes me not feel optimistic is, I see people like Dom and Megan, or I see people that are in the church, in the congregation, questioning, leaving, trying to be better, trying to do something better. And we're all doing that in different ways. And some people are trying to do that by, whatever the way is of doing it. But when it comes to the leadership and the way leadership handles it within the church, whether it's the IFB, the Southern Baptist Convention, which is just a whole frustrating mess. I keep dipping my toe in with this world, fill in the blank with all these different organizations, the Catholic Church, like the leadership doesn't seem to care. And even more than doesn't seem to care, seems to proactively be punishing people who do. And so for me, can this system change? Can churches change? Not as they stand right now. Can groups of people, do I think there'll be new formations of different, better things? I definitely hope so. And I think it is happening, but when I see people like Boz Chividjian, who's got a name harder to pronounce than I do, when I see a Rachel Denhollander, when I see people like that, who I think are the closest to modern day prophets that I can see, when they go out and speak about this stuff and they get booted from the Southern Baptist Convention, it's clear where the priorities are. And so do I think something could happen? Sure, hypothetically, but as it stands with the leadership that's there, I just don't see it. And as one of my guests on my recent episode talked about, bad people are disproportionately interested in power, disproportionately good at getting it, and disproportionately good at keeping it. And I see that play out over and over again. And the people that I think are good people, I think the people, and I would put myself in that category. I would throw myself in the good people that care about this, or I put you and Clara, and I put, I put us all in this circle. Like, we all struggle to get a mainstream platform to talk about this. Yeah. We're sitting here, like, we're talking to each other on our own podcasts because we're not going to get the primetime news spot to talk about this. We're not going to get a stage at this different convention to talk about it. Like, we have to do it on our own. It has to be grassroots. And so, like, to me, that's the answer. Like, we're having to do this because we're not allowed into the place we want to see change. And that's a really scary thing to see. And you even have the credit of saying, I'm a pastor, and that still doesn't give you the pass to
I still don't get invited to it. I don't get invited to our lectureships. I was invited, let's see, to the one college it's now closed, at ODU. But my alma mater, I was invited one time, haven't been invited back. And that's how you crushed it. And I predicted it. I expected to not be asked back because I spoke, and I told them when I came, I was like, I'm not going to sugarcoat. Like, there was a certain script that they wanted me to, one person in particular wanted me to follow. And I said, just full disclosure, like, I sent him an email. I was like, that's not my position, and I'm not going to fake that it is. I was like, if you want to have a debate, like, I'll be incredibly respectful. Like, I'm not going to tell you how you have to believe. But
that's the most horrible thing about it, is that no matter how respectful you are, I people, laugh because, like, my branding can be edgy or whatever. I can, I definitely am, like, whatever. But it's funny when people, talk to me and they go like, oh, you're not a UFC fighter, like, you're whatever your picture on there. I'm like, no, I'm a total goofball, whatever. But when it comes to these dialogues, like, I've never name called people who just carte blanche. I mean, there's been certain people I've specifically called out, but I've never just said, oh, the church is this, or I've never said, oh, everybody who's a pastor is abusive, or everybody who does this. I've consistently said there are good people that are being pushed out. There are good people that need to be amplified more. There are good people that don't want this to happen. There are definitely good churches. But no matter how many times I say that, every time I put out an interview or every time I put out a clip, there's somebody in the comments going, why are you so bitter at churches? Why do you hate Christians? Why do you hate this? And to me, there's just not listening on the other side. It's purely, I think it's going to continue to be like this happening. It's going to be people who are pushed out, who are going to have these conversations and try to figure out, what do we do? Where do we go from here? And I don't have a good answer for that. I'm just trying to keep myself sane and trying to keep, the heat on this topic. But it's like, what do we do? Because the institution as it stands is a mess, and the good people, the best people are the ones I see getting run over by it.
Yeah. Well, I
on that note,
I know. Now that our listeners are totally depressed.
But I will say I'm encouraged by seeing, like I mentioned, I am encouraged when I talk to people like you, and I'm saying, I keep saying you, but I'm talking to both of you. I'm looking at both of you, and each in one eye. That's all a little bit cross-eyed. But when I see, when I see the episodes that you both are putting out, when I see the work of like Adam and Megan, when I see these things happen, it encourages me a ton. And so I do it like to flip it to be an optimistic thing. I'm excited that there's more and more traction happening from the grassroots level of this. And so I do see good things happen. I don't want to say like, oh, I'm the,
Sure.
I don't at all believe I'm a lone voice in the darkness kind of thing. And, whatever, but I think it's cool that there are 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 20 people slowly starting to build these platforms and trying to get the word out. And that to me is the encouraging thing out of all of this. So I want to throw something encouraging. So
no, I agree with your assessment 100%. And I think, I think as the church stands too, like I've been doing this long enough for 10 years now. I've consulted with many churches. I've trained many churches. The churches that do the right thing, and they are out there. I shouldn't say the churches, the individuals who make up part of the leadership team who do the right thing get absolutely annihilated. Consistently. I can predict it every single time. But there are people out there who are standing firm, who are digging their heels in. Our heels are dug in, your heels are dug in. Name an advocate. They burn out, but we come back and we keep doing it because it's the right thing to do. And I think in that there's tremendous hope, and we're seeing it with all these back-to-back stories in the news right now that are high profile stories where justice is being served. Judges are hearing us, whether we know it or not. Judges are hearing it, and they're like, we really understand the dynamics that happens with abusive institutions and abusive families. And, there are judges that are really getting it.
I am going to interject that I am extremely hopeful. I think we are standing on the cusp of a huge change. I truly do. I think there are just thousands of good people doing the right thing. They may not be in the news every day, but they're out there and they're doing the right thing. They're making the right decisions. And just as the pendulum swung too far this way, I am positive, and I hope I live to see it, that it's going to swing back to a very beautiful place. God's church will not be destroyed. I think this confusion and everything that's happening now is going to cause things to topple and build back up. And I pray that building back up is going to be a stronger, better than ever church of our Lord. I truly do.
Yeah, I agree with both of you. And I think Eric's 100% right. It's going to happen on the micro level. It's going to be smaller groups of people, smaller. It's not going to be institutions as a whole. I don't see that happening. I think there's just so much
Think
corruption.
of the ants that are out there and how they tunnel and they build and all that. We have a lot of ants out there just building away. Keep on building, Eric. We love you for it. We truly do.
Man, there's organs swelling in the background. In the edit, we need organs playing in that, and that's a perfect. Brought us back. There's hope.
We can make that happen. Well, Eric, awesome. I mean, honestly, this has been incredibly enlightening and helpful, and I love what you do over at Preacher Boys, and just keep up the good work.
Thank you so much. And likewise, I mean, I still have people reach out about, the episode we did, and Claire, we definitely need to do an episode at some point. But wonderful. It's people constantly reach out and bring it up. And I do, like, it's one that I push often to say, if you don't listen to any other episodes, please listen to this one if you're a pastor, because I think it's just so helpful. And I think it's really encouraging. But thanks for digging the heels with me. And it does, I joke, it is hard. We wake up, we get dressed and we start thinking about this, and it's difficult doing that. But it is, on the flip side, it's encouraging sitting down with people who are like-minded about it, because it does, man, when I'm in my YouTube comments, or when I'm on Twitter, or when I'm getting the emails, or even the sermon mentions, it feels extremely lonely. And it's, and it's just exciting to get around people who are doing the same work. And it's encouraging. And I sound very pastory right now, same work and fellowshipping with one another, but
throw in a brother and sister there.
It's true.
You got it.
But thank you so much for
music.
Be all
Make
Yeah,
it
there's
back
set.
organs
Yeah.
for the last 10 minutes of the episode. I think just organs. But anyway, no,
Yeah.
thank you so much for having me on. I really do appreciate it.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
Wonderful.
And to our listeners, thank you for tuning into this episode. We'll catch you next round.
Thanks again for listening to today's episode. A special thank you to our patrons who make this podcast possible. Please help us get the word out by searching for the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast in your favorite podcast app. Be sure to hit subscribe and rate the show. Please consider supporting the podcast by becoming a patron and check out the rewards our patrons receive.